Laura Bennett was 32 years old and had built a life that, on the surface, looked steady and ordinary. She lived with her husband, Eric, in a modest two-bedroom condo on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. It wasn't in the trendiest neighborhood, but it was theirs. They had purchased it 3 years earlier, signing a 20-year mortgage that consumed a large share of their combined salaries. Still, Laura often told herself she preferred paying down a mortgage to wasting money on rent. There was a certain pride in knowing the walls around her belonged to them, even if the bank technically owned more of it than they did. Her days followed a comfortable rhythm. Laura worked at a mid-sized marketing agency downtown. She didn't love her job, but it paid the bills and gave her enough flexibility to maintain some balance. Most mornings, she brewed coffee, carried it in her travel mug, and drove through the traffic that snaked toward the city center. Eric, an engineer with a construction firm, had an unpredictable schedule. He was often gone late, sometimes overnight at building sites in nearby towns. Laura had grown accustomed to his absences, chalking them up to the demands of his career. On weekends, she liked to visit her mother, Margaret Bennett, who lived across town. Margaret was 58, a retired math teacher who still tutored high school students to keep herself busy. She was a woman of discipline, sharp, opinionated, and occasionally severe. Yet Laura knew beneath the stern exterior was a mother who loved her deeply. Their visits often unfolded around the kitchen table, sipping tea, complaining about the rising cost of groceries, or trading stories about work and politics. The talks were familiar, almost scripted, but there was comfort in their routine. From the outside, Laura's life appeared solid. A husband with a good job, a steady career of her own, and a mother who, though strict, was a constant presence. No children yet, though relatives often asked when she and Eric would start a family. Laura would smile politely, saying they wanted to pay down more of the mortgage first. Deep down, she thought they still had time. It was a Monday evening in late spring when everything began to shift. Laura returned home around 8, tired but satisfied after a long day of preparing end-of-quarter reports. She reheated leftovers, ate in front of the television, then showered and slipped into pajamas. Eric had texted earlier that he would be late, nothing unusual. She expected to spend the evening alone. Around 9, her phone lit up with a call from her mother. Margaret rarely called at that hour. For a moment, Laura's chest tightened with worry. She answered quickly, "Hi, Mom. Is everything okay?" There was a pause, then her mother's voice, tense, urgent, unlike her usual calm tone. "Laura, I need you to do something for me. Right now." "What is it?" "Set up a camera in your living room, somewhere discreet where it can see the front door. Then leave the house. Go to Megan's. Go to a cafe, I don't care where. Just don't stay there tonight." Laura blinked, confused. "A camera? Mom, what are you talking about?" "Please, sweetheart, don't ask questions. Just trust me. Place the camera, make sure it's on, and leave." Her mother's insistence was unsettling. Margaret was not a woman who gave into paranoia or whim. She was logical to a fault, grounded in practicality. Hearing her sound so insistent, almost desperate, made Laura's pulse quicken. "I don't understand," Laura whispered, pacing across the living room. "Why? What's going on?" "I can't explain right now," Margaret said firmly. "I'll tell you later. But for now, do as I ask. You'll thank me." Laura hesitated, but something in her mother's voice left no room for argument. She remembered the small security camera she had purchased last year when they pet sat for a neighbor's cat. It was still tucked away in a drawer, functional, and linked to an app on her phone. She retrieved it, checked the battery, and searched for a hiding place. In the corner of the living room stood a tall potted plant, a broad-leafed ficus. Laura nestled the camera among the branches, adjusting it until the lens captured the entire room and the entryway beyond. She pulled up the feed on her phone. Clear. The angle was perfect. Her heart pounded as she grabbed her purse and jacket. She locked the condo and stepped into the hallway, feeling as though she were walking into a scene she didn't fully understand. On the drive to Megan's house, she called her mother back. "Mom, I did what you asked. The camera's set up and I'm heading to Megan's." "Good," Margaret replied, her tone softening just slightly. "Stay there tonight. Don't go back home. We'll talk tomorrow." Laura's grip tightened on the steering wheel. "Mom, you're scaring me. Is Eric in some kind of trouble? What's happening?" "Not over the phone, Laura. Please, just trust me. Tomorrow I'll explain everything." The line went dead, leaving Laura staring at the road ahead, headlights cutting through the darkness. She felt a knot of unease tighten in her stomach. What could possibly require such secrecy? Why would her mother want her to leave her own home? When she arrived at Megan Thompson's townhouse 20 minutes later, her friend greeted her at the door with a curious expression. "This is a surprise. What's going on?" Laura forced a shaky smile as she stepped inside, the weight of uncertainty heavy on her shoulders. "I'm not even sure," she admitted, "but my mom just asked me to do something strange, and I did it." Megan raised an eyebrow, motioning her toward the living room. "Well, sit down and tell me everything. Sounds like a story." As Laura settled onto the couch, her thoughts circled back to the hidden camera in the ficus and her mother's urgent words. She tried to shake the unease, but it lingered like a shadow in the corners of her mind. That night, as Megan poured 2 glasses of wine, Laura realized that whatever her mother knew, it was only the beginning. Something was about to break open, and her ordinary life might never look the same again. Megan Thompson lived in a tidy 2-story townhouse on the north side of Columbus, just a short drive from the agency where she and Laura had first met years ago. She was the kind of friend who never locked the front door when she knew Laura was coming. When Laura arrived that night, Megan already had the porch light on waiting. Inside, the living room smelled faintly of lavender candles. Megan, dressed in sweats, took one look at Laura's pale face and shook her head. "Okay, Spill. You don't usually show up at 9:30 on a Monday with that expression unless something's really wrong." Laura set her purse down and sank into the couch, exhaling. "It's my mom. She called out of nowhere tonight, sounding different. Urgent. She told me to set up a camera in the living room, then leave the condo and not go back." Megan's eyebrows shot up. "A camera? Why would Margaret ask you to do that?" "That's just it. She wouldn't explain." Laura rubbed her temples. "She just said to trust her and that she'd explain tomorrow." Megan leaned back in the armchair, crossing her arms. "Laura, has it ever occurred to you that she suspects Eric's cheating?" The words landed like a slap. Laura's head snapped up. "No, absolutely not. Eric's not like that. He's just busy. His work keeps him out late, you know that." "I know what you've told me," Megan said carefully, "but men who work those kinds of hours, sometimes there's more to it." Laura shook her head, a flare of defensiveness rising in her chest. "Eric's loyal. He's always been loyal. My mom's just overreacting. She can be suspicious about people sometimes." "Maybe," Megan allowed, but her skeptical expression lingered. "Still, she's not the type to call you at night with something like this for no reason." The thought gnawed at Laura. Her mother wasn't prone to theatrics. If Margaret had sounded desperate, there had to be a reason. But the alternative, that her husband might be hiding something, was too painful to consider. They sat in silence for a moment, the tick of Megan's wall clock filling the room. Megan finally stood, pouring 2 glasses of wine. "Here, drink. You're shaking." Laura accepted the glass, staring into the dark liquid as her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced down and her stomach clenched. It was a text from Eric. "Where are you?" "I just got home." Her thumbs hesitated over the keyboard. She typed back, "I'm at Megan's." Decided to stay the night. The dots appeared, then vanished. A moment later his reply came. "Everything okay?" Laura swallowed. "Yeah, just wanted some girl time." There was a pause, then Eric wrote back. "Okay, Get some rest. I'll see you tomorrow." The exchange should have reassured her, but instead it unsettled her. Something about the clipped replies, the lack of warmth, left her uneasy. She locked the phone and set it face down, forcing a smile at Megan. But before she could take a sip of wine, the phone rang again. This time it was her mother. Laura answered quickly. "Mom." "Sweetheart," Margaret said, her voice still taut, "whatever you do, don't watch the camera feed tonight." "Not yet." Laura's throat went dry. "Why?" "I already set it up. I could check it right now." "No," Margaret said firmly. "Promise me you won't. Go to bed and tomorrow we'll talk." "Mom, you're being cryptic. What's happening?" "I can't say over the phone. Just trust me, Laura. Please, stay with Megan. Don't go home tonight, and don't look at that footage until morning." The line went silent after Margaret's final words, leaving Laura staring at her phone. "What was that about?" Megan asked. Laura shook her head slowly. "She doesn't want me to check the camera feed. Not until tomorrow." Megan leaned forward. "That's even stranger. If she suspects something, wouldn't she want you to know right away?" "I don't know." Laura's voice cracked. "I don't know what to think. Part of me wants to open the app right now, but," she trailed off, twisting the stem of her wine glass. "But she told you not to," Megan finished. "Yes." Laura exhaled shakily, and she sounded so serious, like it would hurt me to know tonight. Megan reached over, resting a hand on her arm. "Then maybe wait. If your mom's protecting you from something, there's probably a reason." Laura nodded faintly, though her mind kept circling back to Eric's text and the strange insistence in her mother's voice. She felt like she was standing at the edge of a cliff, blindfolded, unable to see how far the drop might be. As the evening wore on, they tried to distract themselves with light conversation, but Laura's attention drifted constantly to her phone. The little icon of the camera app glowed, like a secret she wasn't ready to face. She resisted the urge to tap it, hearing her mother's voice echo in her head. Tomorrow, when Megan finally guided her to the guest room, Laura lay awake beneath the unfamiliar comforter, staring at the ceiling. The house was quiet, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. Her phone sat on the nightstand within arm's reach. Every instinct pushed her to check the feed, to see what the camera might be capturing in her living room at that very moment. But fear, and a strange loyalty to her mother's warning, kept her hand frozen. At some point past midnight, exhaustion won. Her eyes drifted closed, though her sleep was fitful. Images of Eric's face, her mother's stern voice, and the glowing camera icon tangled together in her restless dreams. Whatever the truth was, it was waiting for her in the morning. And Laura knew, deep down, that once she saw it, nothing would ever be the same again. The morning light seeped through the blinds of Megan's guest room, casting thin stripes across the bedspread. Laura woke with a start, disoriented for a moment, before remembering where she was. The taste of restless sleep lingered on her tongue, bitter and heavy. She sat up slowly, her eyes falling on the phone, resting on the nightstand. The camera app waited there, a silent invitation. Her mother's warning echoed in her mind. Don't look until morning. Well, it was morning now. Laura's heart thudded against her ribs as she reached for the phone. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the app, then finally tapped. The feed loaded, pulling her breath tight in her throat. At first, the footage showed nothing unusual. The living room, dimly lit by the small lamp near the sofa, was still. The clock on the wall ticked toward midnight. Then, at 12:15, the front door opened. Eric stepped in, shoulders slumped, jacket hanging loose. Laura exhaled softly, tension leaving her body for half a second, until she saw what came next. A woman entered behind him, young, striking, with glossy hair and a confident stride. Laura's chest tightened as the stranger set down her bag like she belonged there. Eric closed the door, turned, and wrapped his arms around her. They kissed, hungry, unashamed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Laura's hand shook, nearly dropping the phone. She forced herself to keep watching, her eyes wide with disbelief. The woman laughed softly, brushing Eric's cheek, then disappeared briefly into the hallway. Moments later, she returned wearing one of Laura's sweaters, the pale blue one Laura had folded neatly just days before. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't an accident. This wasn't a moment of weakness captured by chance. This was familiarity, intimacy, a relationship that had been nurtured, cultivated, carried out behind Laura's back for longer than she dared imagine. Her stomach churned violently. The air seemed to thin around her. Tears blurred her vision as the truth crashed down. Eric, the man she had trusted, the husband she had defended against suspicion only hours earlier, was betraying her openly in the very home they had built together. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth to keep from crying out. Megan stirred in the other room, the sound of the shower running faintly through the walls, but Laura felt utterly alone. Alone with the images playing out on her phone screen, shattering everything she thought she knew. The woman, Vanessa, Laura would later learn, curled up on the sofa, laughing as Eric poured 2 glasses of wine. They clinked their glasses together, settling in as if they were husband and wife. Laura saw the way Eric leaned in, his smile softer, warmer than the half-hearted ones he'd given her lately. He brushed a strand of hair from Vanessa's face with a tenderness that cut like a blade. The minutes stretched unbearably as Laura continued to watch. Every gesture, every look, carved deeper into her chest. This wasn't a fling. It was a relationship full of routines and private jokes, an entire life that had been unfolding in secret. And all the while, Laura had been carrying groceries, cleaning laundry, paying bills, believing in a marriage that had already been gutted from within. The footage looped back, the recording ending sometime after 1 a.m. Laura dropped the phone onto the bedspread, her breath ragged. She pressed both hands to her face, sobs breaking free. Her mind spun in chaotic circles. She thought of the nights she'd stayed late at the agency, exhausted but reassured when Eric said he was still at the site. She thought of the dinners he'd missed, the distracted looks, the sudden new cologne he'd started wearing last fall. How could she have ignored the signs? Her chest ached, a physical pain, sharp and relentless. It felt as if her ribs might crack beneath the weight of it. The man she had loved since her 20s, the partner she had promised forever to, had turned her home into a stage for lies. By the time Megan emerged from the shower, Laura was sitting upright, pale and trembling, the phone clenched in her lap. Megan froze when she saw her friend's face. "Laura, what happened?" Laura's lips trembled as she tried to speak, but the words tangled in her throat. She managed a whisper. "He brought her into our house. They were together, on our sofa." Megan's eyes darkened. She crossed the room quickly, pulling Laura into a fierce embrace. "Oh, honey." Laura collapsed against her friend, the sobs tearing free again. It wasn't just some mistake. She was comfortable there. She was wearing my clothes, like she's been there before. Megan rubbed her back, her own jaw tight with anger. "I'm so sorry. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I knew something wasn't right." Laura pulled back, shaking her head wildly. "I defended him. I told you he was loyal. I thought my mom was overreacting." And the whole time, her voice broke, dissolving into silence. The betrayal was too vast to fully comprehend. It wasn't just Eric's body in someone else's arms. It was his laughter, his tenderness, his time, all freely given to another woman, while Laura was left with scraps. She understood now why Margaret had urged her not to look the night before. Seeing it in the dark, alone, might have broken her completely. Even in daylight with Megan beside her, the images gutted her. Laura wrapped her arms around herself, rocking slightly. Her mind swung violently between disbelief and clarity, between the ache of love lost and the rage of being deceived. She remembered Eric's text from the night before, his bland "get some rest" message, while another woman lounged on their couch. Her tears slowed, replaced by a cold stillness. The pain was still there, jagged and raw, but beneath it something harder began to form. She couldn't yet name it: anger, survival, the first flicker of resolve. For now, she sat in Megan's quiet guest room, staring at the phone in her lap, knowing that her life had split into before and after, and nothing would ever return to the way it had been. By late afternoon, Laura found herself driving across town, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles whitened. The streets blurred past as if she were moving through a fog. She hadn't told Eric where she was going. She hadn't spoken to him at all since morning. The images from the camera still burned behind her eyes. There was only one person she wanted to see. One person who had known before she did, her mother. Margaret Bennett lived in a modest single-story house near the edge of Columbus, a place filled with the scent of books and tea, quiet corners, and a kind of order that came from years of discipline. Laura pulled into the driveway and sat for a long moment before stepping out. Her heart pounded as she rang the bell. The door opened almost immediately, as though Margaret had been waiting. Her mother's expression softened at the sight of her daughter's pale face. "Come in, sweetheart." Inside, the house felt both safe and heavy. Laura sat at the kitchen table, the same one where she'd spent countless afternoons doing homework while her mother graded papers. Margaret placed a steaming cup of chamomile tea in front of her, then sat down across the table. Laura's voice trembled. "I saw it, Mom. I saw him. He brought her home." Margaret reached across the table, resting her hand gently over Laura's. "I know." The confirmation made Laura's chest constrict. "How long have you known?" Margaret exhaled slowly, her eyes steady. 3 weeks. I didn't want to believe it at first. I was meeting a former colleague at a cafe near downtown. When I walked in, I saw Eric at a corner table with a young woman. At first, I thought she might be a client, but then I saw the way he touched her hand, the way she leaned into him. It wasn't business. Laura swallowed hard, her stomach twisting. "I didn't tell you right away because I wasn't sure how to," Margaret continued. "I came back to that cafe twice more, and then I saw them again outside a bookstore, laughing together like they'd known each other forever. It became clear this wasn't some passing mistake. It was a relationship." Laura's breath hitched. Her mother's words confirmed what she had seen on the footage, what she desperately wanted to deny. "I knew if I told you directly, you might not believe me," Margaret said gently. "You love him, Laura. You've built your life around him. I was afraid you'd defend him, that you'd tell yourself I was overreacting. So I decided the only way was for you to see it with your own eyes." Laura closed her eyes, pressing her palms against them as if she could block out the memories. It was worse than I imagined. She was comfortable there, like she belonged. Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's why I told you not to watch the footage last night. I knew how badly it would hurt, and I didn't want you to face it alone in the dark." Laura's tears spilled over, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. "I still feel like I can't breathe, like my whole marriage was a lie." Her mother's gaze softened further, though shadows passed across her eyes. "I know the feeling." Laura looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" Margaret leaned back, folding her arms loosely. Her voice dropped lower, tinged with a sorrow that time hadn't erased. "Your father. You were only 12 when it happened. I never told you the full truth. He had been seeing another woman for months. I found out one afternoon when I noticed charges on our joint account, expensive dinners, hotel stays. I confronted him. He didn't deny it. He just said he wasn't happy anymore." Laura's chest tightened. Memories of her father's sudden absence, the whispered explanations, came flooding back. "I made the decision to leave quietly," Margaret said, her tone calm but resolute. "I packed what I needed, filed for divorce, and never looked back. I couldn't let you see me begging a man to stay when he had already chosen someone else. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but it was also the only way forward." Laura listened in stunned silence. The parallel between her mother's past and her own unraveling marriage left her shaken. It was as if history were repeating itself, as though she had unknowingly stepped into her mother's footsteps. Her voice cracked. "I used to think you were too cold about Dad leaving, that you moved on too quickly. But now," she broke off, covering her mouth with her hand, "now I understand." Margaret's expression softened even more. "I wasn't cold, Laura. I was broken. But I learned that clinging to a man who's already gone only breaks you more. I wanted better for you. I wanted you to never feel this pain. But here we are." Laura lowered her hands, her eyes red and swollen. "I feel so stupid. I defended him to Megan. I told myself you were overreacting. And all along, he was betraying me right under my nose." Margaret's grip on her daughter's hand tightened, grounding her. "You are not stupid. You loved him. That's not a weakness. That's who you are. And the fact that he took advantage of that says more about him than it ever will about you." Laura bowed her head, silent tears dripping onto the table. Her emotions churned. Shock giving way to disbelief. Disbelief giving way to raw pain, and pain settling into a heavy, aching truth. She felt her mother's past reflected in her own present, like a cruel mirror. For a long moment, neither spoke. The kettle hissed softly on the stove, the house around them quiet. Then Laura whispered, almost to herself, "I don't know how to start over." Margaret squeezed her hand once more, one step at a time. "You don't have to decide everything today, but you do need to see Eric for who he really is. And once you do, the rest will come." Laura nodded faintly, though her chest still ached. The truth was unbearable, but she couldn't deny it anymore. The betrayal was real, and now, like her mother before her, she stood at the edge of a life she hadn't chosen, but would somehow have to survive. Laura delayed the return to her condo for as long as she could. After speaking with her mother, she drove around the city aimlessly, her thoughts a tangled mess of disbelief and pain. But eventually she knew she had to go back. She couldn't hide forever. There were things she needed to collect, and she needed to see for herself what her home had become. When she parked outside the familiar brick building, her hands trembled against the steering wheel. She sat there for several minutes, staring at the doorway she had crossed thousands of times before, now tainted with betrayal. Finally, she forced herself to move, stepping out and climbing the stairs as though she were walking into enemy territory. The condo smelled faintly of Eric's cologne when she unlocked the door. The scent, once comforting, now felt invasive, like a stranger's presence in her sanctuary. She stood in the living room, her eyes flicking over the sofa where she had watched the footage of him with another woman. The silence pressed down heavily, thick with ghosts of laughter that were no longer hers. She moved through the space mechanically, opening drawers, pulling clothes from closets, stuffing them into bags without looking too closely. But when she reached the bathroom, she froze. On the sink, beside her own toothbrush and bottle of moisturizer, sat items she didn't recognize. A sleek pink toothbrush, a half-used bottle of foundation, mascara, a bottle of perfume she had never bought. The counter was cluttered with small, intimate pieces of another woman's life. Laura's stomach twisted violently. Her knees weakened, and she gripped the sink for support. Vanessa hadn't just visited. She had lived here. She had left her mark in the most private spaces, staking a silent claim to what had been Laura's alone. Tears blurred her vision as she reached for the perfume bottle. The label shimmered under the bathroom light. She uncapped it, and the scent, sweet, floral, invasive, filled her nose. Laura staggered back, pressing a hand to her mouth. The woman hadn't just been a secret in dim cafes or hotel rooms. She had been brushing her teeth here, applying her makeup here, leaving her fragrance in the air of Laura's home. The betrayal deepened, sinking into marrow. It wasn't fleeting. It wasn't an accident. This was a parallel life Eric had been building right under her roof. She dropped the bottle back onto the counter, the clatter echoing through the small bathroom. Her sobs broke loose, unrestrained. She sank to the cool tile floor, pulling her knees to her chest. The tears came in waves, guttural, shaking sobs that left her gasping. She cried for the years she had poured into her marriage, for the nights she had defended Eric's long hours, for the mornings she had woken early to pack his lunch, believing he was exhausted from honest work. The images tumbled through her mind. Eric's smile meant for someone else, the sweater stolen from her drawer, the toothbrush planted next to hers. Each detail was a nail sealing the coffin of the life she thought she had. For what felt like hours, she sat there on the bathroom floor unraveling. The woman who had walked into this condo, believing in her marriage, no longer existed. Eventually, the tears slowed, leaving her drained. Laura pressed her palms flat against the cold tile, grounding herself. The grief remained heavy and raw, but another sensation began to stir beneath it, a quiet, simmering resolve. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand, standing slowly. Her reflection in the mirror startled her, red-rimmed eyes, blotchy skin, but something sharper glinted beneath the ruin. The pain had not destroyed her. It had ignited something else. She began to pack again, but this time with purpose. She didn't take everything. She left behind things she didn't need, things she no longer wanted touched by this house. Into her bags went only the essentials, the pieces of herself she wanted to carry forward. Every zipper she closed felt like a step away from the wreckage. With each garment folded, each drawer emptied, she built the scaffolding of her escape. When she returned to the living room, she paused. The ficus still stood in the corner, concealing the camera that had revealed everything. She pulled the device out and turned it off, holding it in her hand for a moment. It felt heavier now, as though it carried not only footage but the weight of truth. She slipped it into her purse, then looked around the condo one last time. It was no longer her home. It was a stage where lies had been acted out, where her trust had been dismantled piece by piece. Laura locked the door behind her, the final click echoing in the hallway. She didn't know what her next steps would be, whether divorce papers, new living arrangements, or something else entirely. But one thing was clear. She would not stay trapped in the shadows of Eric's betrayal. The ache in her chest remained, but it was changing shape. It was no longer only grief. It was resolve, sharp and steady, like steel cooling after fire. Laura carried her bags down the stairs and out to her car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the parking lot. She slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, and pulled away without looking back. For the first time since discovering the truth, she felt a sliver of clarity. Eric had stolen her trust, her peace, her marriage. But he would not take her future. The condo felt colder than ever when Laura walked out for the last time that evening, her bags heavy in her hands. The betrayal still clung to her like a second skin, but beneath the ache there was a new thread of thought. Thin, fragile, but persistent. She needed to do something more than just leave. She needed to take back a measure of control. On the drive to her mother's house, the thought surfaced with startling clarity. The trip. Weeks earlier, she and Eric had booked a vacation to Turkey. It had been his idea, pitched as a way to reconnect after months of long hours and missed dinners. He had promised her white sand beaches, rooftop dinners in Istanbul, laughter and photographs to post on social media. She had believed him. She had spent nights imagining strolling through the Grand Bazaar, holding his hand, reclaiming the closeness that had been slipping through their fingers. Now, the thought of stepping onto that plane beside him felt sickening. But canceling the trip outright would have been too simple, too quiet. She didn't want quiet. Not anymore. By the time she pulled into Margaret's driveway, the idea had sharpened into a plan. She carried her bags inside, setting them down in the familiar hallway. Margaret appeared from the kitchen, her brows knitting with concern. "Are you all right?" Laura managed a faint smile, though her voice was tight. "I packed what I needed. I'll stay here for a while if that's okay." "Of course," Margaret said without hesitation. She reached out, brushing her daughter's hair back from her face. "This is your home, too." That night, in the small bedroom she had once occupied as a teenager, Laura opened her laptop. She pulled up the airline's website, her fingers trembling slightly on the keyboard. Their reservation appeared, side by side, Laura Bennett and Eric Bennett. Departure in less than a week. Non-refundable. Non-transferable, at least not without some effort. Laura's mind churned. She didn't want to waste the ticket. She didn't want Eric to enjoy the vacation he had planned, as though nothing had changed. And then she thought of Megan's friend, Samantha, a warm, adventurous woman she had met only briefly at a birthday party. Samantha had laughed easily, asked questions, and carried herself with the kind of energy Laura now envied. The pieces clicked into place. "Laura," called Megan, "do you think Samantha would be free next week?" There was a pause on the other end. "You mean for the Turkey trip?" "Yes," Laura said. Her voice steadied, gaining confidence as she spoke. "Eric doesn't deserve that seat, but I don't see why we should waste it." Megan's slow chuckle betrayed her surprise. "Laura, that's bold, but I think she'd go in a heartbeat." "Good," Laura whispered, staring at the glowing screen. Then it settled. With Megan's help, she made the arrangements. Hours of phone calls, explanations, fees, and transfers later, Eric's name disappeared from the booking, replaced with Samantha's. The confirmation email landed in her inbox like a declaration. She wasn't powerless anymore. When she closed the laptop, Laura sat in silence, her pulse steady. For the first time since the discovery, she felt something other than grief. She felt a flicker of satisfaction, almost a smile tugging at her lips. It wasn't rage or chaos. It was controlled, deliberate. Revenge, yes, but wrapped in quiet elegance. Eric had no idea. He believed he would board that plane with her, charm his way through security, and step into another world where their marriage looked intact. Instead, he would arrive at the airport and find his place usurped. His careful lies would collide with an unshakable truth. Laura had taken her first step away from him and toward herself. That night, as she lay in the bed of her childhood room, Laura listened to the stillness of her mother's house. The walls were lined with photographs of years gone by, birthdays, graduations, vacations taken when life still felt whole. She closed her eyes, imagining what it would be like to wake up in Turkey with someone who wasn't her husband, to feel the sun on her skin without the weight of his betrayal shadowing her. The pain hadn't vanished, but it had shifted. It was no longer just loss. It was fuel. By morning, she had decided she wouldn't return to the condo at all. Margaret's house would be her refuge until she figured out the next steps. Divorce papers, financial arrangements, perhaps even selling the condo if it came to that. She didn't know all the details yet, but she knew she couldn't share a roof with Eric again. When she joined her mother for breakfast, Margaret studied her closely. "You look different this morning. Lighter." Laura sipped her coffee, allowing herself the smallest smile. I made a decision." Margaret tilted her head. "To stay here. To start taking back what's mine," Laura said quietly. Her mother didn't press for more, but the approving glint in her eyes was unmistakable. Laura carried her mug to the window, looking out at the quiet street. The morning sun painted the pavement gold. For the first time in days, she could breathe without her chest collapsing. The hurt still lingered, but beneath it, she felt the stirring of strength. And she knew the first act of her revenge had been set in motion. The terminal buzzed with the familiar chaos of departure morning. Rolling suitcases clicking across tile floors, announcements echoing from overhead speakers, the faint scent of coffee drifting from kiosks. Laura stood near the check-in counter with her passport in hand, Samantha by her side. She felt an odd calmness settle over her, as though she had already rehearsed this moment in her mind. Her bags were packed, her ticket confirmed, and her decision resolute. Eric appeared through the sliding doors a few minutes later, pulling his suitcase behind him. He spotted Laura instantly, his face brightening with the easy confidence of a man who thought the world was still in order. He strode toward her, his smile faltering only slightly when he noticed Samantha. "Morning," he greeted, glancing between them. "What's going on? Why is she here?" Laura kept her expression neutral. "She's coming with me." Eric blinked, confused. "What do you mean, she's coming with you?" "We booked this trip months ago. It's supposed to be us." Laura handed her passport and boarding pass to the attendant at the counter. The printer whirred as the agent confirmed her reservation. She turned back to Eric, her voice steady. "Your ticket isn't valid anymore. It's been transferred." His mouth fell open. "Transferred? To her?" He pointed toward Samantha, his voice pitching higher than he intended. A few travelers in line glanced over. Laura nodded, unflinching. "Yes." The agent handed Laura her documents, smiling politely. Laura thanked her and stepped aside so Samantha could check in next. Eric hovered near them, his composure fraying. "Laura, what the hell is this?" he hissed, lowering his voice, but not his anger. "You can't just, this is insane. I'm your husband." Laura met his eyes evenly. "We'll talk about that after the trip." Eric's jaw tightened. "After the trip? You're seriously leaving me here?" "Yes," Laura said simply. Her calmness infuriated him more than shouting ever could have. His hands twitched at his sides, but the presence of dozens of people moving around them kept him in check. The humiliation was palpable. Strangers were watching, pretending not to, their sidelong glances cutting into him. Samantha returned with her boarding pass in hand, flashing Laura a small, supportive smile. She avoided Eric's glare entirely, moving to stand slightly behind Laura as though she were both shield and witness. Eric leaned closer, his voice dropping to a sharp whisper. "You don't know what you're doing. You can't just throw our marriage away like this." Laura's lips curved into the faintest smile, not of joy, but of certainty. "I'm not throwing anything away, Eric. You already did that. I'm just refusing to carry the pieces for you." His face drained of color, the retort caught in his throat. He straightened, looking around as if the crowd might validate his outrage, but no one came to his rescue. The world moved on around them, boarding calls, children tugging at their parents' arms, the clatter of luggage wheels, all of it indifferent to his unraveling. Laura adjusted the strap of her bag on her shoulder. "We'll have plenty to discuss when I get back. But right now, I'm going to enjoy this vacation. Without you." Samantha touched her elbow lightly, signaling it was time to head toward security. Laura turned to walk away, her steps measured, her posture unshaken. Eric followed a few paces, his voice sharp but low enough not to draw airport security's attention. "You're humiliating me," he spat. Laura paused just long enough to glance back at him. Her eyes were clear, her tone steady. "No, Eric, you did that yourself." The words landed with finality. Eric's face flushed deep red, his mouth opening and closing as though searching for a defense that wouldn't come. For the first time, Laura saw him stripped of the confidence he wore so easily, the mask of the faithful husband, the steady provider. What stood before her now was a man cornered by his own lies, scrambling for footing in a space that offered none. She turned back toward the security line, her heartbeat strong but controlled. Samantha walked beside her, the hum of the crowd swelling around them. Laura resisted the urge to look back again. She didn't need to. She already knew Eric was standing there, small in the swirl of travelers, clutching his useless ticket and his crumbling pride. As they reached the TSA checkpoint, Samantha leaned close and murmured, "You were incredible. I don't think I've ever seen someone hold their ground like that." Laura gave a faint laugh, though her throat ached from holding so much inside. "I don't feel incredible. I feel steady." for the first time in a long while. The line moved forward, and Laura slipped off her shoes, placed her bag on the conveyor, and stepped through the scanner. She emerged on the other side lighter, not just from the absence of her belongings, but from the weight she had finally set down. Eric would stew in his humiliation, replaying the scene in his mind as many times as she had replayed the footage from the hidden camera. The symmetry almost made her smile. He had forced her to witness the collapse of her trust in the privacy of her own home. Now she had forced him to face the collapse of his control in the most public of places. As she and Samantha made their way toward the gate, Laura inhaled deeply. The air smelled faintly of coffee and jet fuel, sharp and exhilarating. For the first time in weeks, the future didn't feel like a dark tunnel. It felt open, uncertain, yes, but filled with possibility. Behind her, Eric's humiliation lingered like an echo, but Laura didn't turn back. Her revenge was not a scream, not a scene, not chaos. It was quiet, deliberate, and complete. And it was only the beginning. The plane touched down in Istanbul under a sky streaked with pink and gold. As Laura stepped out onto the jet bridge, the warm, humid air of Turkey wrapped around her like a new beginning. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the weight of Eric's betrayal pressing on her chest. It was still there, a bruise beneath the surface, but the sharpness of it dulled against the hum of a foreign city alive with possibility. She and Samantha made their way through customs, collected their luggage, and caught a taxi to their hotel. The drive took them along winding streets filled with vendors setting up stalls, children darting between cafes, and the call to prayer drifting from minarets that towered above the skyline. Laura pressed her forehead to the window, drinking in the sights. She had expected to feel alone here, expected the ache of what this trip was supposed to be. Instead, she felt strangely free. At the hotel, Samantha flung open the balcony doors of their room and laughed. "Can you believe this view?" she exclaimed. The Bosporus stretched in the distance, shimmering beneath the setting sun. Boats cut across the water like threads of light. Laura joined her, stepping onto the balcony. The breeze carried scents of grilled meat, spices, and sea air. She closed her eyes and inhaled deeply. For the first time since her world had shattered, she allowed herself to simply exist in the moment. That evening, they dined at a rooftop restaurant. Lanterns glowed overhead, casting warm pools of light across the tables. Laura sipped a glass of wine, listening as Samantha recounted travel stories from trips she'd taken through Europe and South America. Samantha's laughter was infectious, and Laura found herself smiling more than she thought possible. Eventually, Samantha set her glass down and leaned forward. "Okay, Laura, you don't have to tell me if you're not ready. But what exactly happened with Eric? Megan gave me bits and pieces, but I'd rather hear it from you." Laura's breath caught. She had been holding the story inside, letting it churn and twist in her chest. Here, under the Turkish sky with someone who expected nothing from her except honesty, she felt the walls begin to break. So she told it. She spoke about her mother's strange warning, about planting the camera, about the footage of Eric and Vanessa in her living room. She described finding Vanessa's toothbrush and perfume in the bathroom, the coldness that had taken root in her when she realized the affair wasn't fleeting but embedded in her home. She told of the confrontation at the airport, how Eric's outrage had melted into humiliation under the gaze of strangers. Samantha listened without interruption, her eyes steady, her hand resting lightly on the table as if to anchor Laura's words. When Laura finally finished, her throat raw, Samantha exhaled softly. "That's brutal, but you handled it with more strength than most people could." Laura shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her. "I didn't feel strong. I felt broken, like my whole life had been pulled out from under me." "Broken doesn't mean weak," Samantha said gently. "It means you've been carrying something too heavy for too long. And look at you, you're here. You made it onto this trip. You're taking back your time, your choices. That's not weakness, Laura. That's strength." The words settled over Laura like a bomb. She blinked, realizing tears had blurred the city lights beyond the balcony. She wasn't used to hearing herself described that way. Not a victim, not a fool, but strong. In the days that followed, the city became her teacher. She and Samantha wandered through the spice markets, where Laura let the riot of colors and scents flood her senses: saffron, cinnamon, cardamom, vibrant heaps of dried fruits. They cruised along the Bosporus, the sea spray cooling her cheeks as she watched palaces glide by. They climbed narrow streets to ancient mosques, their domes gleaming against the sky. Each step seemed to shake loose the grip of Eric's betrayal. The memory of Vanessa's perfume in her bathroom no longer suffocated her. It became a symbol of what she had survived. The humiliation of defending Eric now seemed less like failure and more like proof of how deeply she had loved. One evening, as they sat by the water with plates of fresh seafood, Samantha asked, "So what's next for you? When we get back?" Laura hesitated, watching the reflection of lights ripple on the waves. For the first time, the question didn't terrify her. "I'm going to divorce him," she said simply. "I can't go back. Not after everything I've seen." Samantha nodded. "Good. You deserve better." Laura smiled faintly. "And maybe I'll finally do the thing I've been putting off. I've always wanted to write, not just for work, but for me. Maybe I'll start a blog. About travel, about starting over. About what it means to find yourself again." Samantha grinned. "I'd read it, and I think a lot of people would, too." The idea took root. For years, Laura had buried her creative side under deadlines and meetings, convincing herself there would be time later. Now, she realized later might never come unless she carved it out herself. By the last day of the trip, she felt different. The pain was still there, it would be for a long time, but it no longer defined her. She wasn't just a wife betrayed. She was a woman standing at the edge of a new life, uncertain but ready. On their final evening, she stood on the hotel balcony, watching the sun sink into the horizon. The air was warm, the city alive with sound. She whispered to herself, almost in awe, "I'm not a victim anymore." Samantha stepped outside, joining her with 2 glasses of wine. "No," she agreed softly, "you're not." Laura raised her glass, her heart lighter than it had been in months. For the first time, she felt like she was steering her own story. The final days of the trip passed in a haze of sunlight and discovery. Laura and Samantha had settled into an easy rhythm, mornings wandering through markets or along quiet streets, afternoons spent sipping tea in shaded courtyards, evenings watching the city glow as the sun fell behind the horizon. Somewhere between the laughter and the long silences, Laura began to notice a shift inside herself. One morning, while sitting in a cafe near the Galata Tower, she pulled out her phone and opened Instagram. The app had always felt superficial to her, something she scrolled through in spare minutes. But now, staring at the photo she had just taken of a plate of baklava glistening under the morning light, she felt an urge to share, not for validation, but for expression. She typed slowly, "New places, new tastes, new chances. Sometimes life breaks you open to remind you who you are." When she hit post, her stomach fluttered. It wasn't just about baklava. It was about her, about daring to speak her truth, even in small ways. The response was immediate. Friends back home commented with encouragement, emojis of hearts and applause. Megan wrote, "So proud of you. Keep shining." Laura smiled, realizing that for the first time in weeks, she was letting others see her not as broken, but as in motion. In the following days, she shared more. Photos of the Bosporus at night, shimmering with fairy lights. A snapshot of Samantha laughing in the market, holding up a scarf. A quiet shot of her own hand resting on a journal, the caption reading, "Starting over isn't weakness, it's strength." Each post felt like reclaiming a piece of herself, fragments she hadn't realized she'd lost in the quiet erosion of her marriage. One evening, as they returned to the hotel after a long day of sightseeing, Laura and Samantha paused at a small bookstore tucked between two cafes. Inside, Laura found a journal bound in soft leather. She traced her fingers over the cover, imagining it filled with stories, her stories. She bought it, tucking it under her arm as though it were a promise. Back at the hotel, she wrote for hours. At first, just notes about the trip, the sounds of the street musicians, the taste of strong coffee, the way the air smelled of salt and spice. But soon her words drifted to her marriage, to Eric, to the unraveling of their life together. She wrote about the betrayal, the pain, the humiliation in the airport, and the unexpected strength she had discovered in herself. The writing poured out of her like water breaking through a dam, and when she finally set down her pen, she felt lighter. The grief was still there, sharp in places, but it no longer held her hostage. On their last night, Samantha suggested they walk down to the water to watch the sunset one final time. They found a spot on a low wall near the harbor. The city buzzed behind them, but ahead stretched only the open sea. Laura sat quietly, hugging her knees, watching as the sky burned with color. Shades of orange, pink, and violet melted together, reflecting across the waves. For the first time, she didn't imagine Eric standing beside her. She didn't picture what this trip was supposed to be. She allowed it to be what it was, a turning point, hers alone. Samantha glanced at her. "You look different," she said softly. Laura smiled faintly. "I feel different." "How so?" Laura kept her eyes on the horizon. "For weeks, all I could think about was what I'd lost. But now, I see that maybe I haven't lost as much as I thought. Eric's betrayal, it was a disaster, yes, but it also freed me. If it hadn't happened, I'd still be clinging to something that was already gone." Samantha nodded, letting the silence speak for her agreement. Laura continued, her voice firmer. "I don't want to live as a victim anymore. I want to choose for myself. Divorce, travel, writing, whatever comes, it will be mine. Not something handed to me by someone else. Not something stolen from me in secret." The words hung in the air, carried away by the wind off the water. As the sun dipped lower, Laura let her shoulders relax. The ache in her chest remained. It would always sting to think of the man she had once trusted. But alongside it was a strange gratitude. His lies had destroyed the life she knew, but they had also forced her into the life she had long postponed. The sky deepened into twilight. Laura breathed in the salt air, the laughter of children chasing one another along the pier, the distant hum of a ferry horn. She felt present, whole, ready. When the final edge of the sun slipped beneath the horizon, Laura closed her eyes and smiled. It wasn't joy, not entirely. It was something steadier, acceptance, empowerment, the beginning of a story she would write herself. She rose from the wall, brushing sand from her jeans, and turned toward the city lights beginning to glow. Samantha fell into step beside her, and together they walked back toward the hotel. Laura didn't look back at the sea. She didn't need to. The past was behind her, carried away with the tide. The future awaited, uncertain and wide open, but hers at last. I should have known something was wrong when my mother's hands trembled as she handed me the envelope. It was wrapped like a Christmas miracle. Shiny silver paper, a red satin bow tied just right, and yet something in her eyes said it wasn't joy she was trying to contain. It was fear. I turned 35 that morning. I'd woken early to prepare everything myself, the lemon vanilla cake, the fresh flowers from the garden, the handwritten place cards. The old wooden house on Beechwood Avenue, with its creaking floorboards and lavender-framed windows, had never felt warmer. I had spent 5 years restoring it, scrubbing every brick by hand, repainting shutters, replacing panes cracked from time and weather. This house wasn't just a shelter, it was my legacy, my heart, a home carved from dust and dedication. The party was small. Just my parents, my brother Daniel, a few uncles, and Ivy, always Ivy, my cousin, wrapped in some designer cocktail dress, smiling like she belonged on the cover of a glossy magazine. not in my modest sunroom sipping sangria. But even her presence couldn't ruin the calm I'd built here. At least, that's what I thought. "Olivia, open your gift," my mom said, voice cheerful and just a little too high-pitched. "This one's really special." I smiled, oblivious. Everyone laughed and chatted as I undid the bow, peeled back the foil wrapping, and pulled out a thick envelope. Inside, stack of papers. I scanned the first line and felt my breath catch. Eviction notice. The room went silent. My fingers froze midair, a tremor starting in my wrist. "What is this?" I whispered. My father looked down, his jaw clenched. My mother blinked rapidly and avoided my eyes. Daniel stepped back like he didn't want to be caught in the blast radius. And Ivy smiled, but not the sweet, airy smile she wore in family photos. No, this was something sharper, something that said, "I win." "Olivia," my mother began, "we know today isn't ideal, but it's time we were honest." I stood up. The chair scraped across the wooden floor with a screech. "This is my house. I rebuilt this place brick by brick. Every board, every nail, my hands, my money." Ivy stood slowly, setting down her wine glass. "But the deed is still under Aunt Rachel and Uncle Ted's name," she said lightly. "Legally, it's never been yours." I stared at her. "You knew? You planned this with them." "I'm helping the family make a smart decision," she said, smoothing the silk on her hip. "This neighborhood's hot. It's the right time to sell." I let out a short, disbelieving laugh. So this was the big surprise? A birthday gift wrapped in betrayal. No one answered. The silence was suffocating. I could smell the vanilla frosting, still lingering in the air like a lie that hadn't settled. My mother stepped forward, voice soft. "You have 45 days to get things in order. We'll help with moving costs if you—" I yanked my hand back. "I don't need anything from you. I need answers. How long have you been planning this?" Ivy didn't flinch. 3 months. I've already spoken with a few investors. The lot is sizable. Prime location. It makes sense. "This house," I said, voice cracking, "is not just some lot. It's mine. Every part of it is me." Daniel finally spoke. "Liv, maybe you should calm down. We can talk." "No," I snapped. "No more later. I want the truth now." But there was only silence again, a room full of people who had known me my whole life, now suddenly strangers in my home. "Get out," I said, the words ice cold. "All of you. Out of my house." My mother gasped. My father looked away. Daniel hesitated. "Ivy." She didn't even blink. "You're blowing this out of proportion," she said, walking slowly toward the door. "And you just made me lose all faith in family." I followed her to the entryway. "Funny," I said, voice low. "I was just thinking the same thing." As the door clicked shut behind her, I was left standing in the hallway with nothing but the papers in my hand and the echo of betrayal in my chest. I didn't cry. Not then. Not even after the last guest left. I just stood there, breathing shallowly, staring at the gold-framed photo on the wall. The day I signed the renovation permits, the day I believed this house would finally be mine. That night, the house felt colder than it had in years. Not from the weather. The spring breeze outside was soft, even fragrant with lilacs, but from the silence that had swallowed the walls whole. The laughter, the clinking of glasses, the sound of forks against plates, all of it had vanished, leaving only the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the eviction notice on my kitchen table, staring up at me like a wound that wouldn't close. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I sat in the armchair by the bay window, arms wrapped around myself, eyes dry but wide. Every creak in the floor felt like a betrayal. Every shadow on the wall felt like a ghost of someone who had once cared. This wasn't just about a house. It was about everything I had poured into it. 5 years of hauling lumber, of negotiating with inspectors, of painting until my fingers cramped, and now they wanted me gone. Like I was just a tenant overstaying her welcome in a place that had always been mine in every way, but legally. And Ivy had smiled. Not nervously, not regretfully. She had smiled like it was a triumph, like she had finally crossed a finish line no one else even knew she was racing toward. That smile wouldn't leave me. I replayed everything, every comment she'd made over the past few months about property values skyrocketing, about how much developers would pay for a lot this size. I thought she was just making conversation, maybe even jealous, but now it all felt like clues, or worse, warnings I ignored. I reached for my phone and called the only person I knew I could trust with everything, Emma. She picked up on the third ring, her voice groggy but alert. Liv, it's late. What's wrong? I need you, I said. Can you come tomorrow? Bring your laptop and that stack of renovation permit files if you still have them. Of course, she said immediately, no questions asked. I'll be there. The next morning, Emmy arrived with a full backpack, hair still damp from her shower, eyes burning with protective fire. She hugged me tight before stepping inside, her gaze immediately landing on the documents still splayed across the table. Eviction, she asked. I nodded. She didn't speak. She just sat down, opened her laptop, and began sorting through digital folders with the precision of a surgeon. Within minutes, she had pulled up scans of every permit, inspection sign-off, and city approval we'd ever filed together during the renovations. These are solid, she said. All approved. All logged. You're clean. Then how did they convince my parents otherwise? I asked. Emma scrolled through more folders. Ivy must have shown them something. Maybe forged complaints or faked permit denials. I blinked. Complaints! She did say the neighbors were unhappy. Said someone filed a noise complaint. Said I'd never told the city I was redoing the load-bearing walls. Emma looked up. And did you? Of course I did. We got city clearance for everything. Emma tapped her keyboard. If she's showing your parents fake documents, then this isn't just family drama anymore. It's fraud. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. What if Ivy had actually gone that far? What if this wasn't just about pushing me out, but about erasing me entirely from what I'd built? I grabbed my phone again. This time, I typed slowly, deliberately. The message was to my brother. Daniel, we need to talk. Urgently. Meet me tomorrow, 8 a.m., Cornerstone Cafe. Please come alone. His reply came a few minutes later. Okay. I set the phone down and looked at Emma. If Daniel knows anything, I need to hear it from him. Emma nodded. And if he doesn't, then we'll show him what Ivy doesn't want anyone to see. Outside, the wind picked up slightly, rustling the curtains and carrying with it the distant scent of cut grass. But in the kitchen, all I could smell was fear. Fear that I was already too late. Fear that everything Ivy wanted to take was already in her hands. The cafe was half empty when I arrived the next morning, the smell of burnt espresso lingering faintly in the air. I picked a seat by the window facing the street. My tea sat untouched. I didn't want caffeine. I wanted answers. At exactly 8:03, Daniel walked in. He looked like he hadn't slept, his collar wrinkled, eyes red. He spotted me and offered a nod, not a smile. That alone told me everything I needed to know. He sat across from me without a word. I slid a manila folder toward him. Before I ask anything, look at these. He opened it slowly. Inside were copies of every permit Emma had pulled the night before, approved, signed, dated. He flipped through the first few pages, then paused at a blueprint we'd submitted 3 years ago. His eyes traced the signature from the city inspector. His lips pressed into a thin line. So, she lied to me too, he murmured. I didn't respond. I just watched his face, waiting. After a long silence, Daniel exhaled long and low. 2 weeks ago, Ivy told Mom and Dad you didn't file your paperwork properly, that you bypassed safety inspections. Said she had complaints from neighbors. She showed them something, looked official. I didn't think to question it. I leaned in, and you just believed her. She had documents, he snapped, then lowered his voice. She said if the city found out, the house could be seized, that you might be charged for unsafe construction. And you didn't think to ask me? I asked, quieter now. You didn't think to give me one chance to explain? Daniel looked down. I didn't know what to believe. She's persuasive. She kept saying it was for your own good, that she was protecting the family, protecting them by kicking me out of the home I rebuilt. He didn't answer, but guilt was all over his face. I took a breath. This isn't just about my house anymore. She's planning something bigger. He frowned. What do you mean? I think she's trying to sell it, not to keep for herself, to flip it, or worse, tear it down and replace it with a development. Daniel's jaw tightened. You think she's working with someone? I nodded. Max Harper. He blinked. Her boyfriend? I've never met him, but Dad mentioned he's into real estate. Exactly. Emma and I are digging deeper, and we're finding holes in every single thing Ivy has told you. I need your help, Daniel. If Mom and Dad believed her because of fake documents, then I need proof to undo the damage. Daniel rubbed his temples. All right, I'm with you. Better late than never. Later that afternoon, Emma and I sat cross-legged on my living room floor, laptops and files spread around us like a war table. She was texting furiously with someone, Chloe, her former college classmate, now working at the city's land records office. Chloe had access to all construction, permit filings, and neighborhood complaints in the Asheville district. She agreed to meet us, Emma said. Public library, third floor archives, 7 p.m. She'll bring what she can. That evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, we stepped into the quiet library. Chloe was already waiting, her messenger bag overstuffed, her eyes sharp with curiosity and concern. She led us to a side table and pulled out a thick file. This, she said, flipping it open, is the petition supposedly filed by a neighbor complaining about unauthorized renovations. This is what Ivy would have used if she wanted to scare your family into acting. She paused. But here's the problem. There's no original. No case number. No entry in the system. I stared at her. Meaning this is either a fabrication or a manipulation of another document entirely. And look here! She tapped the name listed as the complainant. This person doesn't exist in the Willow Street registry. Emma's eyes lit up. This is forgery. I felt a chill ripple down my spine. We were no longer just dealing with lies or emotional manipulation. Ivy had crossed into something far more dangerous. Something criminal. The following day, Daniel arranged a meeting with someone he knew from the city's planning office, Marcus Bell, a mid-level official who had worked with zoning and development approvals for years. Marcus was cautious, the kind of man who chose his words like chess moves. But once he saw the forged documents Emma and Chloe had uncovered, his eyebrows furrowed in something close to alarm. We met him in a quiet office on the 5th floor of a city administration building that smelled faintly of old paper and linoleum. He reviewed the files with a slow, deliberate rhythm, his finger tracing Ivy's fake complaint letter, the fake inspection notice, and the notary seal at the bottom of the supposed land survey. Then he pushed his glasses higher and said quietly, "This is strange. I've seen this version before." I leaned forward. "Where?" He turned to his desktop, typing quickly. It was in a closed-door meeting. 3 weeks ago, presented as part of a proposed development package. Emma and I exchanged a glance. My chest tightened. Marcus clicked into a restricted file, then spun the monitor toward us. On the screen was a project proposal with a sleek, minimal logo at the top, Harper and Stone Group. Project name, Willow Heights. Proposed construction, luxury apartment complex. Location, 197 Beechwood Avenue. I stopped breathing for a moment. That was my address. My house. Emma whispered. They weren't just trying to sell it. They've already pitched the rebuild. I tried to steady my voice. Do they have signatures? From the current owners. Marcus hesitated, then nodded. There's a land survey approval form here. Signed by Richard and Elaine Rickman. My parents. My voice cracked. Did they know what they were signing? Depends, Marcus said. The document looks official, but the notary seal Elizabeth Sterling. That name rings a bell. Emma leaned closer. Sterling? Isn't that Ivy's last name? I nodded slowly. That's her mother. Her real mother. She used to be a notary, but she retired almost 2 years ago. Marcus pulled out a magnifier. If this stamp was applied recently and she's not a licensed notary anymore, then this document could be invalid. Worse, it could be illegal. The room went still. It was suddenly very clear. This wasn't just a matter of family betrayal or a pushy cousin trying to make a quick buck. This was premeditated property fraud, a forged plan orchestrated behind closed doors, tied directly to my cousin, her boyfriend, and now my parents' unknowing signatures. We left Marcus's office just after 4 p.m. The spring sky outside had darkened with low-hanging clouds. As we drove back toward Beechwood Avenue, a drizzle began tapping against the windshield, soft, steady like the ticking of a clock. I sat in the passenger seat, gripping the folder Marcus had printed for me. My house was on that page. Its footprint, its dimensions, its future, redrawn by people who didn't build it, didn't love it, didn't bleed into it like I had. As we passed the Beechwood Historic District sign, I knew what I had to do. I turned to Emma, my voice low but steady. If Ivy thinks she's smarter than me, if she thinks I'll walk away from this house without a fight, she doesn't know me at all. Emma glanced sideways, a faint smile pulling at her lips. Then let's make sure she never forgets. We pulled into my driveway just as the rain began to fall harder, tapping against the roof in quick succession like a rising heartbeat. I looked up at my house, the windows glowing warmly through the mist. It was still standing, and so was I. But something told me, after tonight, the storm was only just beginning. It was nearly midnight when I heard it, the sharp crack of something striking the front porch, followed by the faint thud as it rolled to a stop. I had been in the kitchen, microwaving leftover soup I hadn't touched all day. The noise froze me in place. I turned off the microwave, heart pounding, and walked to the front door. There, lying against the doormat, was a rock wrapped in brown paper. No envelope, no stamp, just a single line scrawled in black marker across the surface. Back off while you still can, Olivia. My blood ran cold. I looked around, heart racing, but the street outside was empty. The rain had stopped, and fog hovered over the pavement like a veil. Porch lights from nearby homes glowed faintly behind drawn curtains. No movement, no witnesses. I picked up the rock with shaking hands and locked the door behind me. The silence inside my home, once comforting, now pressed down on me like a weight. By the time the police arrived 20 minutes later, Emma and Daniel were already on their way. 2 officers examined the rock and took my statement. They advised me to install security cameras and log any further incidents. One of them, a woman maybe in her 40s, gave me a long, sympathetic look before leaving. This isn't just a scare tactic, she said. Whoever left this, they want you to know they're watching. She was right. This had gone far beyond family tensions or business ambition. This was a campaign, a psychological siege. And if Ivy thought fear would make me fold, she'd severely misjudged who I'd become. When Emma and Daniel arrived, I showed them the note. Emma swore under her breath. Daniel clenched his fists. I'll talk to Mom, he said. Right now. He stepped out into the hallway, phone already to his ear. I watched his back as he paced, the conversation muffled, tense. When he returned, his face was pale. She gave Ivy a key last week, he said. Said Ivy needed to take measurements for her engagement party. She didn't think anything of it. My stomach twisted. So Ivy had access to everything. Daniel nodded. But now Mom's suspicious. She heard something in Ivy's voice tonight. Something cold. I sat down slowly, my legs suddenly heavy. It's too late. She's already in motion. That night, I didn't sleep again. Instead, I sat with Emma by the fireplace, just like we used to during exam season in college, papers and laptops spread across the floor, candles flickering in the corners of the room. We combed through everything: blueprints, city filings, inspection stamps, and then we moved on to the notary seal. The one bearing the name Elizabeth Sterling. Emma pulled up the state notary registry and searched. She's not active, she confirmed. Retired 2 years ago. She shouldn't be signing anything. We stared at the digital record. Her name, her license ID, the red inactive badge beside it. There it was, the first piece of undeniable legal fraud. I need to speak with Sarah, I said, reaching for my phone. Sarah Holden had been my attorney for years, helped me navigate permits, taxes, even some contract work when I first bought the house. But this time I didn't need her as an advisor. I needed her as a strategist. When she answered, I didn't waste time. Sarah, I have forged documents, a notary seal from a retired official, fake permits, fake signatures. My house is being targeted. There was a pause on the other end. Then, come in. First thing tomorrow. Bring everything. The next morning, I sat across from her desk, sunlight pouring through her office window, illuminating the stack of folders between us like a spotlight on a stage. This is serious, Sarah said after reading. Ivy's not just manipulating your family. She's committing fraud. And if Max is involved, this could implicate Harper and Stone too. She tapped a pen against the desk. We need to build a timeline. Fake documents, illegal notarization, plans to demolish, links to development companies, motive, opportunity, and access. I stared at the timeline unfolding before me, each piece pointing not to coincidence, but to orchestration. My cousin hadn't just lied. She'd planned this from the very start, and now it was time to show everyone what she'd done. I wasn't expecting her, not at my door, not on a rainy Thursday afternoon when my world felt like it had narrowed to lawsuits, timelines, and surveillance cameras. But there she was, Lena Harper, standing on my porch in a gray trench coat, her expression unreadable. I hadn't seen Lena in years. The last time, she'd been a quiet presence at a family barbecue, trailing behind Max like a shadow. She was the kind of woman who kept her thoughts to herself, the observer in a room full of talkers. But now she looked different, sharper, purposeful. I know what they're doing, she said before I could even greet her. And I want to help. I blinked. Why would you? She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the handle of her umbrella. Because I used to believe in Max. I thought he was building something real, something honest. But Harper and Stone, it's just a front now. Image, greed, power. He and Ivy, her voice caught, they don't care who they hurt. They think no one will stand up to them. But I will, if you'll let me. I stepped aside without a word and let her in. In my living room, under the soft hum of a table lamp, Lena laid out what she'd brought. A thick printout of the event plan for Ivy's engagement party, internal company memos, and most shockingly, a USB drive. Ivy's rearranged the guest list, Lena said. You're not on it. She thinks you'll stay quiet, that you've lost. I laughed bitterly. She always did think I was too sentimental to fight back. Well, this time, you'll be the one with the mic. The USB, she explained, contained a recorded conversation between Ivy and Max, one that Lena had overheard and secretly saved from a company Zoom meeting Max had left open on his laptop. Ivy said, and I quote, "Let them think Olivia's breaking the law. Once the house loses its legal protection, we can buy it for pennies. After the party, everything will be ours." I sat back in stunned silence. Emma, who'd just returned with takeout, nearly dropped the bags. Lena reached into her folder again. There's more. Internal emails, meeting transcripts. Max even created a dummy shell company to purchase the lot in case anyone traced it back. It's all here. I glanced at Sarah, who had joined us on speaker from her office. "If we reveal this at the party, will it hold up?" Sarah's voice came steady through the line. "If we frame it correctly, yes. We don't need to convict them in the room. We just need to reveal the truth, and then let the right authorities do their work." Emma leaned forward, tapping the guest list Lena had provided. "Then we make it theatrical. A reveal they can't spin their way out of. Lights, screens, audio." Lena nodded. "I'll get you in. I've already seen the floor plan of the Bellevue Grand's ballroom. There's a service entrance near the projection booth, and Ivy's too obsessed with herself to notice a familiar face in the crowd." We spent the next 48 hours preparing everything down to the second. Emma edited a short video, part visual evidence, part voiceover of Ivy's own words. Sarah drafted a dossier with hard copies of every document. Lena coached me on where to stand, when to speak, and how to hold their attention just long enough for the truth to sink in. The night before the party, I opened a dusty jewelry box tucked in the back of my closet. Inside was my grandmother's pearl necklace, delicate, timeless. I hadn't worn it in years. I clipped it on with shaking hands, staring at my reflection in the mirror. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about redemption, about showing everyone, especially myself, that I was never the problem. They were. The Bellevue Grand Hotel gleamed like a cathedral of wealth and ego. Chandeliers sparkled overhead like frozen fireworks, and the marble floors beneath my heels seemed too perfect to touch. Laughter echoed through the arched hallways as flutes of champagne were raised, compliments were traded, and Ivy stood radiant at the center of it all, draped in a shimmering white gown that screamed status more than love. I stayed near the back at first, blending into the crowd with the help of a dark satin dress and my grandmother's pearls. Lena had slipped me in through the service entrance 30 minutes earlier. She stood near the projection booth now, hand hovering over the clicker, waiting for my signal. Across the room, Max held Ivy's hand like a man who believed he'd already won. I stepped toward the stage as a violin quartet wrapped up their final notes. A waiter passed by. Someone clapped politely. Ivy raised a glass, her eyes scanning for her next moment in the spotlight. I gave it to her. "Excuse me," I said, stepping onto the stage. The microphone felt cold in my hand, heavier than it should have. "I'd like to say a few words." A few heads turned. Murmurs sparked. Ivy's smile faltered for just a second. "This isn't a toast," I continued. "It's a truth. About this party. About this couple. About a house at 197 Beechwood Avenue that was nearly stolen through forged documents, fraudulent notarizations, and a scheme that's been building for months." Gasps rippled through the room. Someone in the back laughed nervously. Ivy's face froze, then tightened. Max moved, but I raised a hand. "Let's let the evidence speak for itself." Lena dimmed the lights. The large screen behind me flickered on. First came images of my home. The bricks I laid, the garden I planted, the old shutters I restored by hand. Then came the documents, overlaid with red markers. False permit rejections, the invalid notary seal, the land survey signed by my parents with a date that didn't match any record in the city's database. Then the audio. Ivy's voice crackled through the speakers, crystal clear. "Let them think Olivia's breaking the law. Once the house loses legal protection, we can buy it for next to nothing. After the engagement party, everything will be in our hands." Max's voice followed, calm, confident. "I've cleaned out all the internal files. No one will trace it back." Silence fell. Then came the voice of Randall Morris, the lead investor in the Harper and Stone development. He stood up, voice cutting through the hush. "Are these real?" I nodded, handing him the dossier Sarah had prepared. "They're verified. Copies have been submitted to the Department of Planning, the Notary Licensing Office, and the police." The next moment happened in slow motion. 2 plainclothes officers stepped into the ballroom. One walked up to Ivy. Miss Sterling, he said calmly, you are under investigation for document forgery and conspiracy to commit fraud. We ask for your cooperation. The crowd erupted in gasps. Max's hand dropped from Ivy's waist. She turned to me, eyes wild. You set me up. No, I said quietly. You did that all by yourself. I didn't look away as she was escorted from the room. Across the crowd, I saw my parents. They had arrived late, but just in time to see everything. My mother's face was pale. My father didn't move. I walked toward them slowly, pearls resting against my collarbone, heart thudding but steady. I'm sorry you had to see it like this, I said, but without the truth, I'd always be the villain in your eyes. My mother stepped forward and reached for my hand. Her voice cracked. Olivia, I had no idea. We believed her. We didn't know. I know, I whispered. But now you do. I turned away before I could cry, walking slowly through the golden light of the chandelier-filled room. My heels echoed across marble as the doors closed behind me, and with them, so did everything Ivy had ever tried to take. 6 weeks after the engagement party, spring returned to Beechwood Avenue like a quiet apology. The cherry trees lining the sidewalk had begun to bloom, their petals drifting across porches and fences like pieces of forgotten lace. The lavender I planted years ago had pushed through winter's stubborn frost, blooming in tight purple clusters beneath the bay window. My house was still standing, and so was I. The aftermath came in waves. The media moved on quickly after Ivy's arrest. Prominent real estate heiress under investigation for fraud was good for one news cycle, maybe two. Her sentence, a suspended term paired with community service and a formal disbarment from any notary involvement, felt underwhelming. But it wasn't about the punishment anymore. It was about what she couldn't take. Max was quietly ousted from Harper & Stone. Investors pulled out. The company's expansion plans were shelved indefinitely. Lena, true to her word, submitted her resignation and joined a group of local preservationists, launching a fund to protect historic homes in Asheville. She visited often, sometimes with blueprints, sometimes just with coffee and a quiet smile. One afternoon she brought something more, a small bronze plaque. I stared at it for a long moment. My throat tightened. Recognized by the Asheville Historical Preservation Society, it read, "For restoration, dedication, and contribution to the living memory of the city." This place isn't just yours anymore, Lena said softly. It belongs to everyone who believes in rebuilding what matters. I didn't know what to say, so I simply nodded. A week later, I hosted my first real gathering since the party, a backyard dinner with string lights, wooden tables, and the few people who had stood beside me when it counted. Emma, Lena, Chloe, Marcus, even Daniel, who showed up with a bottle of wine and eyes still heavy with regret. We laughed. We passed plates. We stayed long after the candles had burned down, wrapped in light blankets, watching the stars blink through the trees. For the first time in what felt like years, there was peace. And later that night, after everyone had gone, I sat alone on the front steps, barefoot, hair undone, a mug of tea cooling in my hands. The breeze was soft. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was clean, restful. I looked out over the yard, across every brick, every window frame, every familiar shadow that now felt like a memory stitched back together. The pain hadn't disappeared, but it no longer owned me. A few days after, I got a visit I didn't expect. Max. He stood at my gate in a plain button-down and jeans, his hair unstyled, his posture small. I didn't invite him in. I lost everything, he said quietly. I didn't take it from you, I replied. He nodded. I know. There was a long pause. I'm trying to start over, he continued. Somewhere far from Ivy. Far from all of it. I don't expect forgiveness. But if there's any chance to support what you and Lena are building, I want to. I studied him for a long moment. Then I said, not because I forgive you, but because I believe everyone deserves a chance to start over if they're willing to begin from zero. We shook hands. That was all. No closure. No second chances. Just space. I watched him leave, his figure growing smaller beneath the branches overhead. Then I turned back toward the house, my house, still warm with the scent of lilacs and paint and memory. The place where I had once read by the window as a child, and where I now sat as a woman who had reclaimed every piece of herself. Some people inherit homes. Others fight to keep them. Me, I rebuilt mine, and no one would ever take that from me again,